It's 3 p.m. here in the Central European time zone, and good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of EUCOPE and my co-presenters today, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. I'm Marcus Drogi, and I serve EUCOPE as the Senior Advisor for Market Access and Commercialization Topics. Axel Kort is EUCOPE's Senior Legal and Regulatory Affairs Advisor. And Matthias Olsen manages public affairs and policy for the organization. Stefano, we can go to the next slide, please. During the session today, which is part of EUCOPE's Life Sciences lecture series, we'll be discussing a new, albeit interim, joint scientific advice opportunity that's offered through the EMA and multiple HTA bodies. And by way of objectives, we would like to, for today's session, we'd like to introduce you to the newly launched interim parallel procedure. We'd like to review specific features and requirements of the procedure and place this very procedure in context of the broader EU joint HTA and joint clinical assessment ecosystem, if you will. So that's post the UNETA activities, the joint EU HTA processes that will commence on January 12th, 2025. And time permitting, we'll provide some commentary toward the end regarding some of the more strategic considerations that you as manufacturers and companies might want to think about when seeking to participate in the procedure. We'd like for this to be as interactive as possible, or as the functionality allows here. So please use the chat functionality to ask any questions along the way, and we'll be sure to check those chat questions frequently and address them as much as possible. So thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar and for the introduction and perspective on the broader European joint HTA assessment landscape. I will turn it now over to Matthias.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Very happy to be here with the colleagues today. While EUCOPE is quite involved in this topic and has been involved over the past couple of years in the implementation of the EU HTA regulation, today we're focusing on a very specific part, which is preparing for this new procedure and hoping to share some information with you. But before we do that, we are aware that even though I'm sure there are many colleagues that are joining us today, there might be some new faces as well that might not be that familiar with the procedure as such. So before we get into it, wanted to give just a quick overview of what this is. And as many of you are aware, in 2021, we finally received the new regulation on health technology assessment, which makes it obligatory for companies to submit for HTA or health technology assessment at the EU level. And this assessment is referred to as a joint clinical assessment. So the regulation, the background for the regulation is that currently all of the different 27 member states are performing this health technology assessment, where they assess the relative efficacy and safety and also the cost efficiency of new innovative products compared to existing treatment alternatives within their healthcare systems, in order to inform the price reimbursement decisions. They have done this in 27 different ways, so some with more built up HTA systems and some with less developed HTA systems. And the finding of the European Commission when they did their study for this regulation was that these divergent HTA processes and methodologies in member states created a lot of burdens and inefficiencies and hindered innovation So this is one of the two main things that this regulation aims to address. And then the second is the duplication of work, not just for national HTA bodies, where you are doing 27 different assessments, looking at most of the time, for most part, a lot of the same data in parallel, 27 different times over. And this is, of course, not just a burden for the HTA bodies, but also for companies, especially small to mid-sized companies that then have to submit in 27 different member states, in 27 different procedures, often different languages, certainly different requirements. So when there's an opportunity to harmonize this and streamline these processes, this is of course of interest to everyone. And this joint clinical assessment will in fact only cover a part of what is covered under health technology assessment, what it consists of, and that is the relative efficacy and safety evaluation. So evaluating the relative efficacy of a product and relative safety compared to existing products on the market. Meanwhile, the cost efficiency, this will still be performed at the member state level. So even if will be mandatory to go through a joint clinical assessment, you will still have to do part of the HTA assessment at the national level, and this anything that relates to pharmacoeconomic evaluation. What's interesting here is in order to help avoid this duplication, there was a compromise reached where any evidence that is requested at the EU level as part of the joint clinical assessment cannot be requested again at the member state level. However, there's a caveat, and additional data may be requested. So if a member state has an interest in certain additional comparators populations that were not covered by the joint clinical assessment, then those data, certain additional studies might be requested at the member state level. So this is something, of course, that should, for the most part, be prevented as much as is possible by harmonizing this procedure. Today, we will be looking at the first part you see on the right-hand side, the joint scientific consultations. This is opportunities for early scientific advice. It can happen just for the HTA bodies together or with the EMA, but more about this later, as my colleague Axel will be going into this for how this will be working in the interim procedure. But you will have the opportunity to have joint scientific consultations prior to joint clinical assessments. Then the joint clinical assessments that are mandatory. There will also be the identification of emerging health technologies performed by the member states or horizon scanning, and in order to forecast the needs in terms of capacity, and perhaps also in suitability of those assessment methodologies. And then there will finally be opportunities of voluntary cooperation as well, which we will not be going into, but this can involve non-clinical assessments, so the voluntary cooperation economic evaluation, or also other covering other health technologies. Next slide, please. So the implementation of the EU HTA regulation, I think it is fair to say that it is driven by the member states. Over the past years, prior to the regulation itself, we had EUNETA, which was a joint action, a collaboration from some of those leading HTA bodies in Europe that had more developed systems. And after this regulation came into force, the European Commission issued a service contract where these HTA bodies under EUNETA 21 umbrella came together and developed proposals for methodological and procedural guidance for the EU HTA procedure. And now you see also when this regulation the new procedure comes into application, the member states will also be in charge of conducting these assessments, led by the member states coordination group. They will perform joint scientific consultations and joint clinical assessments. Meanwhile, the European Commission is providing secretariats for this work, and is supported by a stakeholder network where EUCOPE is a member, and also providing input on the implementation. And as you see from the timeline, there's been a lot of work done. We're just 1 year out, so we're getting close to that date of application. Next, please. Which is the 12th of January 2025. So from this date, any product is submitted to the European Medicines Agency after this date with either a cancer indication, oncology indication, that is an ATMP, and here under, I should note, it could also be an OMP with a cancer indication. these will be subject to a mandatory joint clinical assessment you will have to submit for JCA at EU level. And from the 13th of January 2028, this is then extended to orphan medicinal products, so non-oncology products. And then from 30th of January 2030, all centrally authorized medicinal products will have to go through this procedure. So as you can see now, we have some time to prepare for this to best ensure success in going through this procedure, in understanding the requirements. And one of the key ways of doing that is, of course, engaging those early dialogues and having this conversation. That's why today we would like to talk about the opportunities for doing that in the interim period. So I leave it here and hand over to my colleague Axel, who will speak more about that.
Yeah, many thanks to you, Markus, and Matthias, for these introductory words. And as both of them said, I will be covering and give you an overview about the technically correctly called parallel EMA HTA body scientific advice procedure, which was essentially pushed out to support the transition from the EUNETA project, which Matthias just outlined, until the full coming into effect of full application of the HTA regulation on the 12th of January 2025. And it is something that is already reflected in the HTA regulation. The parallel scientific advice procedure in Article 16, para 5 of the HTA regulation provides the legal basis for parallel scientific advice. And this is also reflected, as you may know, in the pharma package proposal that is currently being discussed in Parliament. Also there you will have a parallel scientific advice procedure just to leverage early advice opportunities, as well from a regulatory decision-making perspective, as well as from an HTA perspective, just to get this coordinational element in order to shape development plans very early. This interim procedure is going to be accessible from September 23 until December 24. Why December? Why September? Because the EUNETA ceased to exist on the 16th of September 23. And there has been learnings and experience also through the EUNETA collaboration on parallel scientific advice, limited, but there has been, so there's a certain dynamic and also a continuation towards the full transition into the HTA regulation. And during this interim period, which is a learning period or a preparation period for companies, companies are obviously left to the decision to either follow the purely national processes or tap into the new environment, which is a transitional environment, but will very much, I think, be consistent with what you will have to expect once the HTA regulation is in full force and effect, because the work in the HTA coordination group and its subgroup, as Matthias outlined, is ongoing, and a lot of the learnings will be transferred. Next slide, please. So what does the interim procedure or the interim guidance set out? So it was released in July this year, and it does outline a relatively stringent set of requirements, which is primarily focused on the specific selection criteria, also for the interim procedure. And these selection criteria are also the ones that are reflected in the HTA regulation. So going to be no surprises. So consistency with respect to the European HTA assessments. There's obviously an expectation for significant cross-border dimension or to meet major EU-wide added value when it comes to public health. What is worth noting in respect of the interim procedure is the fact that the German Federal Joint Committee, GBA, is the single gateway, the so-called HTA coordination contact, which coordinates and facilitates a centralized HTA assessment during the interim period. So this is kind of the entrance point, and I will come to that in a bit to give you more flavor and more background how that actual process works. It is solely on the initiative of individual health technology bodies in preparation for the full application of the HTA regulation. So this is the overview. Next slide, please. With respect to the key principles, because we are in the interim period here and are not yet fully operational from a legal perspective when it comes to the regulation. So this is a multi-stakeholder procedure with the European Medicines Agency and the HTA bodies being equal partners while respecting legal remit. Why do I say that? It's also something that is outlined in the preamble of the HTA regulation. You may know that the regulatory decision-making process has obviously a different perspective. It looks at efficacy, safety, and the positive benefit risk profile, whereas the HTA looks at obviously the added benefit and against comparator therapies, and then also health economic implications in a later stage, and the competency distribution also between the supranational level, so the European level and the national member states, is always delicate. So no interference with respect to subsequent pricing and reimbursement processes. So, and this is also one of the fundamental principles that need to be adhered to in this interim procedure. It is a single integrated process which is confidential. So the exchange of information between the European Medicines Agency, the HTA bodies, the participating HTA bodies, as well as the applicant, the company is confidential, as it applies to any scientific advice procedure according to regulation 726/2004. Obviously, the general access to document policies applies, policy 4043, when it comes to protecting commercially confidential information and the protection of personal data. But that's the general environment which would also apply when you come into the regulation. Then standard conflict of interest rules apply on national participating level as well as on the EMA level. It is worth noting that the advice that you will receive from the EMA as well as from the participating HTA bodies is not legally binding. And the CHMP advice will be taken into consideration because that's going according to the regulation, Article 57, also for the subsequent marketing authorization application process. Next slide, please. So who are the actors in this interim process? It's on the one hand side, as the word parallel says, the regulator in the form of the scientific advice working party. So everyone who is in a regulatory function will be used to interactions with the scientific advice working party and also other working parties or committee. When it obviously comes to orphans, significant benefit or protocol assistance falls into the remit of other working parties, but it's essentially the rapporteur who is then also supported by the EMA scientific advice officer, who will also be the main contact person for the HTA bodies and the applicant for this specific procedure. As I mentioned, the scientific advice is something that is already embedded in the current regulatory system as it goes to the existing regulation 726/2004. Sorry for the typo there. On the other actor are the HTA bodies. Those are split into two different roles. You can either, as HTA body, actively participate and provide advice on the national requirements, or you participate in the procedure as an observer and following the advisory process and recommendations of the other participating HTA bodies and EMA. The whole participation is purely voluntary. You will need a minimum of 2 HTA bodies actively participating in the procedure, but there's no selection to be made by the applicant with respect to the participating HTA body, because that all falls into the remit and responsibility by the HTA coordination contract as the centralized gateway and recruitment responsibility. Next slide, please. Yeah, just a few elements I think which are useful to know, and the whole procedure is also promoted very heavily, not heavily, but it is promoted by the European Medicines Agency also in their stakeholder platforms. That's why we also wanted to provide you with the references, so the email address of the GBA as the central entrance point, and you will be needing to apply by using forms that are already in existence and that you will find on either EMA or the existing ONETA 21 websites. Applicants will need to be submitting their interest 3 months earlier than the standard submission timeline, because there's a pre-submission phase where the draft briefing document is properly tweaked and before the overall procedure kicks in. The whole process depends on available resources. So there are a few qualifiers also in the interim guidance that this will be decided on a case-by-case basis, taking selection criteria into consideration. I will come to these in a minute. Everything is integrated and individual, so there's no follow-up, no successive follow-up with respect to the procedure, so no other consultation possible. Once this specific procedure has terminated, I did say that the HTA coordination contact, so the GBA, facilitates the central recruitment, so reaches out like a hub and spoke to all the potentially participating HTA bodies. It is also important to note that no pivotal clinical trial should have started yet, so pivotal phase 2 or 3 in order to be able to be selected. Discussions on post-licensing evidence generation can be facilitated only in conjunction with request for discussion of pivotal trial design. So that is the conjunction between post-licensing evidence generation and potentially the pivotal trial design for submission. Next slide, please. As Matthias outlined, in line with also the gradual application of the HTA regulation, you will have oncology products and ATMPs as products who will first or will be preferred for consideration. The whole is one single procedure for parallel scientific advice. I mentioned that consultations take place in a discussion meeting format in the end. Something I can also go into a bit more detail if participants are interested. The HTA body recommendations are not being consolidated, but remain separate and individual. But they're through also interactions between the EMA and the participating HTA bodies, there is certainly an attempt to be made on mutual understanding. And the overall procedure takes between 3.5 and 4.5 months from the draft briefing package until the outcome of the parallel scientific advice, which is individual written recommendations as well as the EMA scientific advice letter, as you may be used to it, also in a single scientific advice procedure with the EMA. I don't know if there are any questions. I would probably need an interruption because I'm still quite ill and my voice is glitching a bit. But Marcus, I don't know if there's any immediate questions.
Well, we have a question here from Karen Bookers. This is about the member states and HTA bodies that will participate in this interim parallel scientific advice procedure. So Karen, in the joint scientific consultations, it could be any of the 27 member states, but in this interim procedure, I don't think it is mentioned, is it, Axel?
No, it's not. I think, I mean, theoretically, if ready, if capacity, if expertise permits, any member state HTA body is permitted to participate. So it's relatively generic in the guidance. I would say behind the scenes, you do hear who is participating. So it's obviously the GBA, it's the French HTA body, it's the Irish HTA body, potentially some of the Nordic HTA bodies, but it is open to all European Union HTA bodies, as reflected then also in the later application of the HTA regulation.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the pragmatic viewpoint as well, right? To consider, who might be or which member state HTA body is more likely to participate. But what is mentioned in the actual document and the procedure is that if there aren't, and actually I may have mentioned that briefly, but if there aren't one or even two or even one HTA body expressing willingness to participate in the process, the scientific advice procedure will proceed even without HTA bodies, right? And participating, which, one would hope that's not going to happen, but that is spelled out. So if there's an inability to recruit enough HTA organizations, then it's to get scientific advice, just the conventional EMA early scientific advice.
Yeah, no, absolutely correct. It's not downgraded, but actually the pathway continues, and you will fall into the Article 57 procedure just to make use of your of resources also at the agency level. Indeed, that's an important clarification. Yeah, let's move on, please. Just also mindful of time. And I think we did mention the selection criteria, which are not cumulative but alternative criteria, and I let you digest these just for a bit, and you can see they will also be reflected in the HTA regulation when it comes to HTA assessments of medical devices and other health technologies. But looking at unmet medical need, also one of the main concepts in the pharma package, first-in-class potential impact on patients' public health or healthcare systems. So always a rather collective perspective or wider European perspective, also with the cross-border dimension, and major union-wide added value. So certain terms which you will obviously need to substantiate, but certain indications that also have priority when it comes to the coming into effect of the HTA regulation, obviously fall into that scope, such as oncology or broader neurological disorders, for example, and others I can imagine next to obviously ATMP and innovative technologies. I don't know if any one of my colleagues would like to chip in, but that's my current understanding, that we will likely to get as close as possible, you know, to the preparation of the HTA regulation and reflect effectively also the gradual scope phased over the years.
So I think, Axel, the takeaway, at least on my mind, and correct me if you disagree with this, is that you know, those are somewhat you know, stringent criteria, right? So not entirely sure how they'll be applied, but they're stringent, and they're also somewhat different from probably the criteria as they've been applied by UNETA 21, for example, in those I believe 8 you know, test cases or opportunities or slots that were available for early scientific advice. So you know, it's really a matter of assessing those criteria closely or diligently, and then deciding if that's the opportunity for you. And by you, I mean, you know, a company with an innovative program.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's probably that dimension. I mean, driving innovation, obviously, and looking at public health considerations. It's probably also a pragmatic reason when it comes to capacity at this stage of participating HTA bodies, but obviously getting used to also the full implementation of the regulation. But I agree, it's qualitative criteria which needs to be substantiated, and you will do that through the application process and the documents that are being provided by the agency, as well as the guidance in these documents to substantiate these criteria. Next slide.
And these criteria, just that, so these criteria are also applied by UNETA, and I think you mentioned this, Axel, it's the same criteria that are in the regulation, and of course they're trying to tailor this as much as possible to the future joint scientific consultation procedure. And so they have already done some thinking about how to apply these, and I think we can expect some additional elaboration on how these could be applied as well. And I think there's still a bit of uncertainty about how to, you know, best position yourself compared to maybe others that are going for those innovative slots as well. But I think you raised some good points about how to possibly do so.
And thank you, Karen, for you know, asking another question and moving us right along, because you know, you were asking about the benefits of seeking, you know, consultation during the interim period as compared to the individual national advice mechanisms that still exist. We'll talk about that briefly in just a minute or so.
Yeah. No, thanks for all the questions and the interchange. Maybe we just move on just to get a grab also on the process, which is the next one. It is fairly detailed, and sorry for the relatively busy slide, which is a reflection of the interim guidance, which is also busy in outlining the procedure, as well as the table that gives you all the specific dates. Overall, I said 3.5 to 4.5 months from briefing package to actual outcome. So I would say a relatively swift procedure, obviously depending also on the preparation within the process, and also the work on the list of issues as they arise, you know, from the regulator as well as from the HTA bodies. But it essentially kicks off, and Marcus, you pointed it out, it falls slightly short. It says simultaneous notification, and applicants notify the Scientific Advice Secretariat through the IRIS platform, and simultaneously submit the draft briefing package to the EMA and the HTA coordination contact. That is followed by essentially flagging initial interest to the GBA as the HTA coordination contact. We provided you with the email address, which is also set out in the interim guidance. Then there will be, based on that application, a notice of selection. And once the applicant has been selected, these processes or the overall integrated process kicks off. And on the regulator, so the EMA side, all goes through the IRIS system, which you're used to if you are a prime applicant, or if you retain scientific advice or protocol assistance. So this is essentially where the process will be captured and where documents need to be submitted, whereas the communication to the HTA coordination contact goes through OIDRA-Link as the safe document transfer system. And following that simultaneous notification and the submission of the draft briefing package by the applicant, we essentially enter the pre-submission phase, which starts, as I said, once the request to EMA through IRIS and the provision is submitted. It will be no telephone conference, no virtual interchange. It will all generally be written comments to the draft briefing document. The idea of the pre-submission phase is to finalize the briefing document and then kickstart the actual procedure with the evaluation phase once the submission through IRIS has occurred, as well as to the GBA, once EMA has also confirmed the validation and the completeness of the briefing package, including documents and all of its annexes. And the evaluation phase, the actual scientific advice, which is the result and the outcome of the overall procedure, is essentially governed through a list of issues from both angles when it comes to the data generation plans, the development plans, obviously from the competence perspective of the regulator as well as the HTA bodies, and based on these list of issues, there will be which will effectively facilitate the exchange during the final discussion meeting, and also form the basis of the exchange between the EMA and the HTA bodies, because they have a closed virtual meeting prior to the actual discussion meeting to exchange their perspective and their views. So all directed towards a meaningful discussion meeting and in the end, and potentially adapting or upgrading or restructuring the specific company development plan. And the discussion meeting is essentially the final point of the procedure. It's currently being held in virtual form, but there's also the possibility to do that face-to-face. I think it's potentially, depending on the individual case and the capacity and also the importance of the procedure. It's capped to a max of 3 hours. And at the end, the applicant is asked to provide minutes to the EMA as well as to the participating HTA bodies, which will not be endorsed formally by the parties, but serves as the record for the applicant, and obviously also a foundation for subsequent subsequent reflections potentially in the MAA process. So I think all in all, this is kind of the snapshot of the process. I will not go into every timeline because they're relatively transparently set out in the guidance document. There's also a good structure on the roles and responsibilities by the applicant, the EMA, and the HTA bodies at each stage of this interim process. And I think you will potentially find this process helpful in familiarizing yourself also with a process that may then look substantially similar under the HTA regulation, and also when future guidelines are being set up for parallel scientific advice. So I think it's something that is already spelled out, and regulators and HTA will just try to also use this as a learning mechanism. So this is about the process, and I think I would leave it here, Marcus, looking at the time, and obviously leave room for discussions and questions to the participants.
Super. Well, thank you, Axel, for this really nice and comprehensive overview of the procedure. So the question, of course, so what does this all mean, right? So what should we take from this? And as a company, perhaps looking to decide how to optimize your investments in early scientific advice opportunities, scientific consultation in region Europe, you might find excellent value in participating in this opportunity if, right, if and only if you know, you have the right program, and I think that came through very, very clearly, as Axel has outlined some of the requirements. So you know, if that innovation argument cannot be made really effectively, then you know, it'd be difficult, right? If those cross-border dimensions, comparative benefits aren't really where they could be, difficult. So that's one of the key points. I know Karen had asked that question about, you know, how do I weigh what's better here, or what's positive. I think at a very high level, of course, you get a 2-for-1, right? So that's a real benefit of this opportunity, to just look at this from the perspective, hey, I get scientific advice or consultation from both the EMA and ideally 2 HTA bodies. So I think that's a clear benefit. But you also get you know, an early look at what the final, and I'm doing the quotation marks, the air quotes, what the final procedure might look like when we get to this in early 2021, including some of the processes that are involved. You know, you'll see how HTA bodies will look at the evidence. So that's, I think, all very positive. Of course, this would have to be weighed against some of those internal resource requirements, right? So, you know, does your organization have the resources at the right time to seek that advice and go through with the procedure? It's fairly rapid, it's fairly quick, as Axel mentioned, so that requires some planning from that perspective as well. Yeah, those are some of the thoughts, I think, at least on my mind, that you might want to ask yourselves, if this procedure is right, if participating makes sense. In short, I think if the program meets those selection criteria fully, you know, there's certainly, you know, value in participating. Just some thoughts. I'll, you know, turn it over to Matthias again.
Thank you very much, Marcus, for giving that the perspective, which I think it's important. I mean, it does involve a lot of work preparing for these meetings, so I think it's an important question to ask yourself whether it is worth it. So you know, how does, when we think about this, why is it worth it? As was mentioned by yourself, Axel, earlier, the procedure is still in the implementation phase. So even though we are 1 year out from the date of application, there's still a few things that need to be decided yet. So when it comes to the detailed procedure rules, the methodologies, these are not yet fully defined, even though we have an early understanding and early look at what some of the thinking from the member states with the work of UNETA 21. And so being able to participate in these discussions, these conversations with HTA bodies via this interim parallel scientific advice procedure, might be able to receive an early indication of the expected scope or PICOs that is of interest to each of the participating member states. And if you look at the EU HTA procedure, there might not be an opportunity for having these types of scoping discussions or meetings that we're familiar with from national HTA procedures. And so it will be even more important perhaps to have those earlier even interactions in order to better prepare and understand the member states' requirements. And as you had mentioned, Marcus, since the procedures and methodologies are not yet finalized, it also gives a good opportunity to receive feedback on the suitability of your intended study designs and whether these are actually fitting what the HTA bodies would like to see, or maybe they would like to see additional evidence generated as well. And this is also a great opportunity just overall to identify any gaps, possible gaps, data gaps that might not be possible to be filled within traditional study designs. There's an opportunity to discuss those plans when it comes to filling in those gaps in the post-launch with developing, for example, setting up registries or relying on real-world evidence, real-world data in order to fill those evidence gaps. And I understand from the guidance that this will also be an opportunity for discussing post-launch evidence generation in this interim procedure as well. So these are some thoughts from our side. I think I kick it over to you, Marcus, and I see we have a couple of questions here from the participants.
Thank you, Matthias. I was just trying to type and respond to a question from Thomas Eckert, and I should not do that simultaneously. So, but let's talk about this live. I think Thomas mentioned that he might have a different perspective on the value, and participation makes sense in almost every instance. And I'm paraphrasing here. I think that's the message that we're looking to send as well. Not really trying to be difficult or critical. Too critical is a better word of the requirements. It's probably almost always a good idea to get a quick or an early look at what those final requirements might look like through participation in this procedure. What it would look like, though, and this is also more commentary than knowledge at this point. We're not really aware of a lot of takers at this point. So the procedure became effective in September, so fairly recently. But to my knowledge, I'm not aware of an organization that has yet gone through or even initiated the process. So perhaps that's an indication of some thoughtful evaluation and assessment as well. And that's despite the promotion that I think the regulator that EMA invests in also.
Yeah, no, maybe just to echo also what Thomas wrote and what you just responded to. Exactly. I mean, it is around priorities. Initially, and I think it was last year, late 22, when the overall process was also pitched to participants at the stakeholder meeting at the EMA. There was a lot of qualification around capacity, and it was reinforced that it is an interim voluntary procedure. But indeed, this may have slightly changed over the 12 months, at least on the 4th of December. I also heard at the EMA meeting that they don't actually know why this is not better received, and why companies are not tapping into this learning environment or the future process, which may look slightly different but substantially similar overall. And I also think it's rather positive also to look into elements where you may need flexibility. You have considerations when you have an ATMP and think about the use of other data than clinical trial data, real world evidence. Just considering that, for example, the data quality framework has just been published by the EMA, and there's a lot of progress made, I think, also through the big data steering group when it comes to methodologies and the use of real-world evidence and regulatory decision-making. So I think this is something where it's not only to test, but I think it is worth when shaping development plans and considering the inclusion of certain sources of data. So I think, I would also encourage companies to participate, because there's availability for this interim procedure. But right, I mean, obviously the selection criteria are the substantive criteria for entry. But if there's no one yet, obviously the chances of the others are usually increased.
No, and in addition, maybe I can echo what has been said. I think it's absolutely positive that this procedure is being offered. It's really good, because there wasn't anything planned between the end of the NETA 21, as you have highlighted, and that GPA is willing to step in and coordinate this is really good. And they of course have a lot of experience providing this to national procedures and have that capacity to coordinate that. And I think that should absolutely be welcomed. And when we look at overall at receiving scientific advice, I think we have seen a lot of studies where it shows that it increases your likelihood of having a positive HTA outcome. So of course it makes sense for your product, and absolutely one should go for those slots. I see we have a couple of questions in the Q&A as well from Natalia. So Natalia, you're asking about you had asked about how this is aligned with the work of the European Commission, and I think you refer to some of these information days that the European Commission is organizing. So I think this was mentioned in the presentation, but I think it's important to clarify that this interim procedure, it is not foreseen under the regulation, even though it closely mirrors the requirements for joint scientific consultation. This is something that is being provided by the member states to fill a need until the regulation comes into application at the beginning of next year. So the European Commission is also organizing a number of info days as well. And overall, they're of course busy with implementing acts and a lot of other things that will need to be in place before the beginning of next year. I don't want to go into detail on all those activities, but this is separate from the work of the European Commission. So this is the member states that are are helpfully offering this interim advice. And I think maybe Axel, this second question perhaps is for you. It's how about collaboration with innovation task force within EMA involved in early stages of scientific advice for scientists and SMEs? Is there a mention of the innovation task force, or are they typically involved in early stages of scientific advice? I would then imagine that they would sort of be involved or pulled in this as well.
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, there's no explicit reference in the interim guidance, but I would intuitively say through the Scientific Advice Working Party who coordinates within the EMA, and you know, just considering our past interactions, including our bilateral meeting with the agency where the SME office was present, I would certainly say that the EMA is also interested in bringing that expertise into the process. I don't know how this would play out specifically under the guidance, but I guess it's potentially an internal coordinational matter and not a priori impossible. I think that's how I would see it, because the SWAP, so the Scientific Advice Working Party, as well as the EMA scientific officer, has a coordinational role, and I could imagine that they obviously, depending on the development program and the structure and the priorities, and in also supporting innovation from SMEs or other stakeholders, academia, I could very much see that also as a potential opportunity. Yeah, I don't think there's a restriction, but it is worth asking, looking at the guidance, potentially considering an application, and I think entering the process will answer these questions. I haven't done it myself, but I think it is worth assessing.
Good point, Axel. Thank you. I think this also, takes care of all of the Q&A to this point. I'm also mindful of the time, and hoping that everyone who participated in today's webinar, leaves our conversation a little bit more comfortable with this interim joint procedure. So that'd be our hope. Hopefully, you're also taking away some of the benefits that you're getting a 2-for-1 really, if you have the right program, and really can get to look at your evidence package from a test drive perspective, right? An earlier look at the strength of the data and how the agencies think about what you have in mind for the process. But with that, without wanting to ramble on here, again, I think we'll close today's webinar. I wanted to thank all of my co-presenters and colleagues for a fantastic presentation and discussion, and also wanted to thank, on behalf of EUCOPE, all of you participants on a Thursday afternoon. So thanks, everyone, and we'll see you at the next webinar, Life Sciences lecture session. Thanks again.
Thanks very much to everyone.
Thank you, everyone. If you have any questions, you can contact each of us. We'll share the contact details.